gonna need a really big brain.
Bigger than his?
Excelsior! Marvel Studios has done a great job of keeping characters as true to their comic book roots as possible in the MCU. Some characters are slightly altered or dampened in certain areas such as skills, powers, and/or intelligence. In this video, we're going to focus on the latter. Here are some MCU villains with higher IQs in the comics. Stupendous! Yondu Undanta was the Centaurian leader of an exiled faction of the Ravagers and adoptive father figure of Star-Lord himself, Peter Quill. We all know that Yondu is no longer with us in the MCU, well, at least not the primary Earth 616 version, but if the comic books are anything to go by, Yondu has a well-known Earth 691 counterpart somewhere out there as well. Although Yondu is not the most evil and hell-bent supervillain in Marvel history, especially after redeeming himself by helping to stop Ego, the Living Planet, in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, he has been and is primarily presented as a bad guy more often than not. When it comes down to IQ, well, Yondu isn't necessarily considered the smartest blue alien in the multiverse to begin with, but that is not to say he is not sly or smart. A skilled marksman and tactical space pirate, Yondu in the MCU comes across as a lesser educated version of his comic book counterpart, oftentimes being the butt of the joke or being upstaged and outmaneuvered by his foes in combat. With that being said, the crest on Yondu's head that looks like a giant red mohawk is part of his anatomy, stemming out of his skull, which I'm sure is what's using up most of his brainpower. Currently in Seagate Prison and rumored to be returning to the MCU during the upcoming Phase 5 series Armor Wars, Justin Hammer will pay $1 before giving his 2 cents any day. CEO of Hammer Industries and rival of Tony Stark, at least in a business sense, Justin Hammer is a military contractor who is more inclined to pay people to do his dirty work for him. A character who still poses a viable threat while serving as comedic relief, the Hammer we have gotten to know in the comics over the years is a much more calculated and cerebral industrialist. As I'm sure you all remember, Stark utterly humiliated Hammer publicly at that hearing in Iron Man 2, and although Justin was able to hijack Iron Man's Iron Legion and create a knockoff Stark tech, it only happened because he hired Whiplash, Ivan Vanko, who ultimately went rogue anyways, humiliating Hammer even further. Without question, the Justin Hammer from the comics would not allow himself to be taken advantage of and embarrassed so often and so easily. And how? Flash Thompson is Peter Parker's high school bully turned sort of friend in both the MCU and the comics. However, how the character arrives at that point in each medium is quite different. Comic book Flash picked on Peter in high school before becoming his post-secondary pal. Flash would go on to become a soldier who would lose his legs, all before being bonded with the Venom symbiote, rendering him an anti-hero called Agent Venom. Flash would even go on to become the superhero called Agent Anti-Venom and is a masterfully tactical soldier possessing a wealth of knowledge and experience garnered from his time spent in the military. MCU Flash is the complete opposite, a self-centered, overprivileged, clout-chasing, rich kid type who loves Spider-Man and poses as Peter Parker's homie. In the comics, the man who would become Agent Venom is a strong leader and team player, whereas the MCU's interpretation is a definite follower with his mind focused on likes and social media impressions. Do you think Flash will become Venom in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? The Soviet Union's first super soldier, Alexei Shostakov, is the Red Guardian, Russia's answer to Captain America. Primarily considered an anti-hero, Alexei is the surrogate father of Black Widow's Natasha Romanoff and Yelena Belova, and has spent many years undercover in America, as well as in prison, unafraid to criticize the Russian government. Past his prime bruteness, the Red Guardian in the MCU is quite reckless and acts like he has something to prove. Comparing him to the comics, the Red Guardian is the Soviet Union's most acclaimed and extraordinarily skilled test pilot ever. Furthermore, Shostakov was trained by the KGB, a literal intelligence agency which I'm sure expanded his IQ to some degree. We all hope to see Captain America and Red Guardian duke it out in the movies sometime soon, and Alexei even claims to have once outsmarted and defeated good old Steve Rogers in the past. It is confirmed that Red Guardian will team up with John Walker's Cap in the Thunderbolts movie, so is it possible that he'll cross paths with Sam Wilson as well? Described in the comics as usually shouting and never happy, Dr. Maya Hansen in the MCU seems much more restrained and agreeable to say the least. Although Maya is not an outright supervillain dead set on global or galactic domination and does possess some redeeming qualities, she is nefarious and should not be trusted. With both adaptations of Dr. Hansen betraying and pulling one over on Tony Stark, she definitely qualifies for this list. Making her first and only MCU appearance in Iron Man 3, Maya was not much more than a highly intelligent and well-connected woman scorned, as the events of the film essentially spurned off of a one-night stand between Hansen and Stark back in 1999, coitus. Back in the books, Maya Hansen seems much more calculated and would not let her emotions get the better of her, rather, she would be manipulating the emotions of others. As one of the MCU's most forgotten characters, do you think we could see Dr. Maya Hansen return alongside the likes of Justin Hammer during Ironheart or Armor Wars? Smarter in the comics than his cinematic counterpart and way less into dancing, Baron Helmut Zemo, in any interpretation of the character, is a brilliant mastermind to say the least. One thing that separates Zemo in the movies from Zemo in the comics is, yep, you guessed it, his overall intellect. More than just a brain, comic Zemo also trumps movie Zemo in brawn. On top of being an expert marksman, the Baron is also an exceptional hand-to-hand combatant, as opposed to in the MCU where he doesn't seem to be able to fight really, like at all. Combining Zemo's fighting acumen with his vast historical and political knowledge, that equates to a higher all-around IQ in and of itself. Plus, Baron Zemo in the comics would never be caught and imprisoned twice as easily as he was in both Captain America Civil War and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Rumored to be returning once more in the Thunderbolts movie, I feel as though another brilliantly executed Zemo scheme is in the works for the MCU during Phase 5. Very similar in both the comics and the MCU/Raimiverse, which is now canon multiversally speaking, Norman Osborn aka the Green Goblin impressively enough has a higher IQ in the books. Now, I'm not implying that he is any less intelligent or infallible business-wise. However, it's clear that the Goblin formula has driven the scientist into a much greater level of insanity on film than on paper. Although both versions of Gobby are insane and struggling with the maddening voice in their head, it is clear that in the MCU, this voice overly consumes Osborn. In the comics, Norman is much more capable of convincing people that he is a good guy and manipulating others. On top of his keen, persuasive tendencies, this version of Osborn seems to also be a much better industrialist. At one point, Norman had even taken over the role of the Iron Patriot before turning back evil, and eventually becoming known as the Gold Goblin. The last we saw of the Green Goblin in the MCU was at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home, where he was effectively killed off by Earth 616 Peter Parker. However, that was Raimiverse Green Goblin, and with Osborn appearing in the upcoming animated series Spider-Man Freshman Year, set in an alternate MCU timeline, perhaps this show will give us some insight on the Earth 616 Norman Osborn that surely exists. Dr. Otto Octavius, more famously known as Dr. Octopus, was able to redeem his villainous ways and narrowly escape death twice in both Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man No Way Home. Of course, he was being corrupted by wacky technology both times, but that's neither here nor there. A brilliant nuclear scientist, Otto Octavius, has flexed both muscle and brain power in his two cinematic appearances. However, anybody who knows Doc Ock knows that in the comic books, he is much more sharp and sinister. In one story arc, Dr. Octopus was able to brilliantly ditch his old body, placing his mind inside of Peter Parker's body, taking over for the superhero as the superior Spider-Man. Combine Octavius's intellect with Spidey's radioactively enhanced physiology and bear witness to what is recognized as possibly the most powerful version of Spider-Man that we have ever seen. Although it is very unlikely that we will ever get a superior Spider-Man appearance inside of the MCU, there is a good chance that we'll meet the Earth 616 Dr. Octavius sooner rather than later. Another one of the few characters on this list that has already tasted defeat and whose only hopes of appearing in the MCU again is if they come back as some sort of variant or in an animated series or something. Ronan the Accuser unquestionably is much smarter in the comics than in the MCU. I mean, he basically lost the Power Stone via dance battle in the first Guardians of the Galaxy film. Literally, Star-Lord danced as Ronan and made him choke before being disintegrated by the Power Stone. I mean, there was a little more to it than that, but how I described it pretty much sums up the climax of the movie. Furthermore, Ronan showed stereotypical bad guy tendencies, talking too much and leaving himself vulnerable to being tricked by the likes of Peter Quill. Ronan seemingly has a far higher IQ in the comics and is an accomplished strategist as well as an expert in interrogation. With Ronan's exceptional ability in analyzing people, and aliens for that matter, accompanied by his physical powers used to impose his will over others, there is absolutely no way that the Accuser would ever let somebody distract him with hip gyrations in the comics. Introduced in the MCU all the way back in Phase 1 during the Incredible Hulk, Samuel Stearns was a college professor using the alias Mr. Blue, attempting to help Bruce Banner cure himself of his Hulk problem. Long story short, Stearns was storing Banner's blood samples in order to study it further, and even stooped as low as to gleefully experiment on Emil Blonsky, who would later become the Abomination. Stearns was injured during Blonsky's transformation, and drops of Banner's blood dripped into an open head wound the Doctor had acquired, transforming him into the Leader. Sam Stearns makes this list not because he is any less intelligent in the MCU than he is in the comics on a basic human level. Rather, it's due to the fact that we have not seen the vastness of his superior intellect in the MCU yet. Being teased in both She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, and Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, we now know the Leader will return as the main antagonist during Captain America: New World Order. Plus, a Thunderbolts movie involving Red Hulk is on its way, and in the comics, Sam Stearns evolved into the Red Leader at one point, so perhaps he will tie into that movie as well. Either way, it won't be long before we get to experience the Leader's literal and figurative big headness on screen. There are a handful of variations of Ultron in the comics depending on his model and what timeline we are looking at, all seemingly more advanced than the one that came before it. Created by Dr. Hank Pym, Ultron was so advanced at conception, he was able to hypnotize Pym and escape his lab. Upgrading himself several times from Ultron 2 through Ultron 5, and eventually way further beyond that, the sentient cyborg continues to evolve to this day. In fact, Ultron is currently known as All-Father Ultron in the books, as he has ascended to nearly divine power levels after being trapped in a space-time realm for 100 years. In the MCU, the walking supercomputer was based off of Bruce Banner and Tony Stark's minds, and both versions almost immediately acquired all of the knowledge and information existing on the internet. What separates the two iterations of Ultron is that in the MCU, he really only ever reached his infancy stage before being destroyed. We did get a chance to see Infinity Gauntlet wielding Ultron in Marvel's What If. So if you want to make an argument that he might be the most prolific version of the character intellectually that we have ever seen, I will listen to it. But as of now, I'm going with the Ultron from the comics who knows how to hide inside the sun. One of the oldest living beings in the universe, the Collector, is obsessed with, well, collecting. From living beings to trinkets and gizmos to powerful weapons and enchanted stones, Taneeler Tavan collects it all, living for innumerable years and possessing incalculable knowledge of inanimate objects and unique characters from around the universe. The Collector is immortal as far as we know. Analyzing the MCU further, it seems as though the Collector of Earth 616 is easily tempted and can be walked all over by heroes and villains alike. Over in the comics, the Collector is among the most perspicacious and technologically enhanced individuals in the galaxy, coming across far more serious than his MCU counterpart. Maybe villain isn't exactly the right word for this character, but he and his family are known for being deceptive and ominous. Speaking of his family. Brother of the previous entry on our list, the Grandmaster is the ruler of Sakaar and has a morbid fascination with gaming and manipulating lesser life forms. The Grandmaster, like his sibling, is one of the elders of the universe and remains one of the oldest living beings in the yada yada. You catch my drift. Although he is personally one of my favorite characters in the entire MCU due to his comedic nature and nonchalant impulsiveness in the books, Indubitably is a much more deceptive, obsessive, and intense villain. Unlike his brother, however, the Grandmaster has an extensive expertise in all sciences, but prefers to use lesser-powered people as his pawns to do his bidding. Again, a character that toes the line of good and evil. The Grandmaster in the comics is even capable of resurrecting people from the dead, something we have not seen him do inside of the MCU. And Indubitably is currently just chilling on Earth with a dude named Daryl and is more or less forcing his Earthling roommate to pay rent until he gets bored of the planet and decides to move on. Zeus Panhellenios is the god of lightning, member of the Council of the Godheads and leader of Omnipotent City. Never overtly evil or super villainous per se, Zeus does play antagonist to Thor and Asgard on a regular basis in the comics, and it appears that trend will continue in whatever the next movie will be. During Thor, Love and Thunder, Zeus appeared to be less wise than one would anticipate. Furthermore, he is spiteful, comfortable, past his prime, and possibly inebriated. Already resentful of supers populating the universe, Zeus not only got roughed up by Thor and friends showing low fight IQ, but his own weapon, Thunderbolt, was used against him and straight up swiped by Valkyrie. In the comics, Zeus rivals the likes of Odin in knowledge of the 9 realms, the cosmos, and the afterlife, and is a formidable physical foe on top of that, tasking his son Hercules with hunting down and waging war against Thor and other supers. We will definitely see Zeus again in the MCU soon. And who knows, maybe if he can get his wits about him, we will experience the lightning god as he was intended to be. Thanos is one of, if not the most compelling, cunning, and badass supervillains in the history of the MCU. Brilliant but sadistic in his philosophies and methods, Thanos is also one of the most cold-blooded, headstrong, and battle-tested warriors in the entire universe. However, in the comics, the Mad Titan understands secrets of the cosmos to a far greater degree than exemplified in the Avenger films. Spending a great majority of his youth studying the afterlife and other realms under the guidance of death, an entity that often uses Thanos' infatuation with her against him, the Cosmic Conqueror is a deviation of a god that is nigh invulnerable. He is even capable of traveling across the multiverse in a multitude of ways. I know y'all remember when Thanos famously collected and weaponized all 6 Infinity Stones, so stop and really think about this. Thanos operates at such a degree of mental fortitude with enough comprehension of time and space that he can simply put on the Infinity Gauntlet and understands how to use and control its unbridled mightiness. Remember kids, knowledge is power.
You know what's cooler than magic? Math!
And that's our list. Did we leave any out? Who is your favorite dealer of darkness who isn't so bright in the MCU? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons and enable notifications so you don't miss a moment of canny comic content.